Hello, Brubs. We're back with Heinz Ewers' Vampire, a 19 teens book which was translated in 1934 into English. And we are on chapter 2, I believe another long chapter, but I shall check before I start just to give me a sense of where I need to go. 18 pages, not too bad. Barrels. Barrels. Not like barrels, but barrels. While they were crossing the continent, the decision grew in Frank Braun to go to Germany with the other two. Slowly and gradually, he made up his mind, but in the end, he was firmly convinced like this, after all, was the best thing for him to do. His reasons were, of course, entirely different from those of his companions. They had only the one thought in their mind, Germany. They saw their fatherland attacked by an enemy 10 times superior in number. They saw it on the verge of unavoidable defeat unless it could hurl back its enemy by exerting its last ounce of strength. And they were part of this strength, these two men. They did not look upon it as a duty they had to perform. It was merely their instinct of self preservation that motivated them as a tiny particle of this immense unit that was Germany. Their country was fighting and defending itself to the last drop of blood, and it must either win or perish, and so must they. It never occurred to them that any German could feel otherwise. They took it for granted that Frank Braun felt exactly as they did, that with every breath, with every beat of his heart, he was echoing their all consuming thought: Fatherland, Germany. He did not feel anything of the sort. He realized, of course, that individuals were unimportant in a time like this, and he saw how they willingly effaced and submerged themselves in the mass with millions of others, to be welded by the intense heat of patriotic fervor into an instrument for Germany's defense. And he saw how from this giant crucible there had emerged suddenly, overnight, a new being, young, powerful, titanic, the people, but he did not belong to it. All was he owed to his constant struggle against the others, fighting against them, the lone battle of the individual, fighting against people everywhere, mostly his own, but always against the masses, the nation, the herd. To be part of it, to be one with the crowd, might mean new life for millions of people who were nothing in themselves, who were created only in this hour of need when they became an atom in the huge body of a unified nation, and thus breathed, lived, fought with it. But he wanted none of this. For him, it would mean the loss of everything he stood for. It would reduce him to a mere speck of dust, like millions of others, to a tiny, miserable scrap of flesh on the bleeding body of the nation. What was life for the others would mean death for him. To efface himself, to be submerged in the mass, never. Their souls rejoiced in that which they called fatherland, and their exultance gave courage to their bodies, and lent them strength and endurance, gave them the will to win. His soul heard the message that had wrought this change in them, and he saw how all the others responded, every one of them, but he remained cool and reserved and refused to become infected by their intoxication. His soul heard the call but did not heed it. His body, oh yes, his body might join them, his legs and arms and his brain, a pair of thighs that knew how to guide a horse, an eye that was sharp enough to find its mark, a fist that had often wielded a sword. After all, it did not matter why he came, so long as he did come. They could probably use him. War was nothing new to him. He had been in 4 or 5 of them. They had been small wars, of course, ridiculous revolutions in Mexico, Haiti, Venezuela, and Peru, but it was good practice just the same. Here, as there, people were shooting with deadly bullets and hacking their enemies to pieces with long knives. This new war was different in one respect, however. In Europe, the great slaughtering was to be handled scientifically now, by experts instead of by the crude, childish amateurs in murder whose inefficient attempts he had witnessed. Yes, he wanted to be there, but not out of patriotism, purely out of adventure, lust. He had been in the South Seas dreaming life away in Samoa while the Italians were stealing Tripoli. He had heard of the Balkan War in Kashmir, but only after it was all over. He had already missed two opportunities, and this time he wanted to be there. This is Vampire by Heinz Ewers. It seemed to him, however, as if he were going to a war between utterly strange nations, between people that meant nothing to him, just as at the time in El Paso when he matched silver dollars with the Texan cowboy, heads or tails, for Villa or Huerta. The only difference was that this time he had no choice of sides. Hello, bros. That was the only nice thing about it, this certainty that he would fight for Germany and not against it. But this decision was prompted by hardly more than a feeling of cleanliness, a matter of upbringing and inheritance, just as he would refuse to wear anyone else's shirt so long as his own was still whole in the seams. It happened just as they were pulling out of Salt Lake City. The man sat before Frank Braun 3 or 4 seats away. He sat there and spat regularly every 2 minutes into the large brass cuspidor. But he did not use the one that stood beside his seat. He spat in a great arc into the next one 2 chairs away, over toward where Frank Braun sat. Not once did he miss. With deadly precision, he always hit it exactly in the center. A marvelous spitter, the second officer commented. That fellow should be a submarine, the pursuer added, and he spit a torpedo. And his spit a torpedo, and the spittoon an English cruiser. Frank Braun stared at the stranger. He had not been sitting there before. He must have just got on, or perhaps he had come in from another car. As Frank Braun looked at him, he was struck by the man's resemblance to his uncle, the old Sanitasrit Ten Brinken, in fact. The man looked exactly like him. He was short and very ugly, with a smooth-shaven chin and heavy tea bags under his eyes. He had thick lips and a large, fleshy nose. His left eyelid drooped, almost covering his eye, but his right eye was wide open and looked at the world with an ugly sneer. The only difference was that Frank Braun's uncle did not spit. No, that he certainly did not do. It could not be the Sanitasrit. What kind of fucking name is that? Sanitatrat. Of course not. Besides, the Sanitatrat was dead as a doornail. He had hung himself 3 years ago, thank God. The second officer got to his feet. I am going to the dining car, he explained. I have seen many Dagos spit in my life, and some were pretty good at it, but I'll be damned if I ever saw one spit as black as this man. I wouldn't even mind that so much, but the regularity of it makes me nervous. I count up to 115 and plop, it goes into the spittoon. The man never moves, and I count all over again. Counting seems to be your special hobby, the purser laughed. Do you want to start a new list, as you did in the quarantine days? You can do the counting yourself now, the officer called back. Hello, brovs. The uncle sat there still, silent, immovable as a piece of stone. He did not read, he did not smoke, he did not move, he spat. Frank Braun now counted the intervals and got as far as 123. The next time he counted 2 more, and then 4 less. It must be exactly 2 minutes, he thought, and he counted again. He counted 5 times, 10 times, 14 times. The man rose to go. He looked over to Frank Braun with a quick, fleeting glance, and a slimy, putrid leer dripped from his thick lips. In that moment, Frank Braun thought, no, he was convinced that this must be his Uncle Jacob. Come on, damn it. And yet the man This fucker doesn't want to stay off there. And yet the man also resembled the dead Chinese who had floated around the fever ship, or perhaps the Chinese was his uncle, was his excellency, the Geheim Sanitätsrat Jacob ten Brinken. Frank Braun held his head. The purser exclaimed, "Thank God that swine is gone." Frank Braun looked up. Yes, the man had gone. He was just passing through the door into the next car. Funny, he remarked. The man looked very much like my uncle. Your uncle can't be much of a beauty, then, the purser ventured. Frank Braun said slowly, "A beauty, no. One could have hardly called him that. Hardly. I am going to follow him." Whom? The man. The spitter. Slowly and heavily Frank Braun rose from his seat. His voice sounded parched as he said, "He looked exactly like the Chinese." "He looked like whom?" the purser exclaimed incredulously. "Like the Chinese. The Chinese, you know. The one who died of the fever, and whom I sewed into the canvas bag. The one who came up the next day and floated around the boat. Say, doctor, it must be the heat in here." The other man remarked, "First you said he looked like your uncle, and now he resembles the Chinese. Or perhaps the dead Chinese was your uncle. Congratulations, doctor. Anyway, go and have a highball with lots of ice in it. That will do you good." Frank Braun stared at him. He really looked like both of them, he stammered. "I must follow him." "All right," the purser laughed. "But then you won't mind if I take your seat until you come back. The sun is shining right in my face here. And give my regards to your Chinese spitting uncle." Frank Braun barely listened. He thought, This is broad daylight. It is 1 o'clock in the afternoon and a hot, bright summer day. We are in the middle of the United States in a Pullman car of the Union Pacific between Salt Lake City and Denver. It is broad daylight. The ugly man was standing in the next car. He seemed to have been waiting, and now he turned around, grinned, and walked on. Frank Braun followed him through 8 cars to the first. The car was empty. The man walked right up to the chair at the foremost end of the car, turned it around, and sat down. Then he spat into the center of the large brass cuspidor beside him. Frank Braun took another chair halfway down the car and stared across at him. He began to count again, 119, 120, 100, and the cuspidor did not seem to contain any water. There was no splash when the man spat into it, only a faint, slightly metallic noise like a chirping or whistling, or rather a squeak. Very black it came through the air, right into the brightly polished spittoon. Ping, ping. Frank Braun could not take his eyes off the spittoon and strained his ears. Something was scraping in there. Something pushed and rubbed against the metal. It seemed to be racing around inside the cuspidor, very fast, going round and round. 118, 19, 20, and the man pursed his fat lips, and the black blob came flying through the air, black as ink, and right into the round hole of the metal spittoon, on which the sun shone brightly, making it sparkle like pure gold. Ping, ping, and at once it started to scrape again, started to race around inside the spittoon. The thing that the man was spitting had life. Frank Braun leaned forward in his chair and stared at the cuspidor. Now he could see it clearly. A little black head lifted itself out over the round hole. Small pointed ears were pricked up, and tiny green eyes peered over at him. It lifted itself onto the rim, dropped back, and finally jumped up again. For a short moment it sat on the bright gold in the sunlight. Then it jumped out and disappeared under the chairs. Frank Braun drew a deep sigh of relief. So that was it. A poor little mouse had been hiding in the cuspidor and must have been terrified by the hail of black missiles. So that was the explanation. But the little mouse escaped, thank God. Yet there was another squeak and more scraping inside the spittoon. Frank Braun thought there must be more in there, a whole nest of them, perhaps. They came out, large and small ones, one by one, sat on the sunlit piece of gold, pecked, no, it's peeked, into the world and jumped down and disappeared. Another one, and another, still more, many more. Again the ugly man pursed his lips, but no, he did not purse them. He blew them up like a lead funnel and spat something black, and this black thing moved in the air, and even before it landed in the spittoon it squeaked. Frank Braun heard it quite clearly. It squeaked, and again after 2 minutes, and again after another 2 minutes. The man was spitting black mice. Strangely enough, this did not seem at all unusual to Frank Braun. He remembered a man he had seen once in the circus bush in Berlin, and a second time in Madrid in the Teatro Romeo. The man had taken a large bowl filled with water in which swam little fishes, tadpoles, and frogs. He raised it to his lips and drained it with all its contents. Then he leaned back, puffed up his cheeks, and blew, and a pretty fountain came out of his mouth. The fishes he had swallowed came spraying through the air, golden, silver, green ones, salamanders, frogs, tadpoles, even a few fat leeches. They all thrashed around on the floor, and the attendants hurried to gather them up and put them into an aquarium where they all swam about merrily. It must have been a relief to be there after the dark belly of the magician. Perhaps the ugly man in the car did the same thing. He perhaps had a well-filled mousetrap in his pocket, or even a whole cigar box full of them. Probably he stuffed the little creatures into his mouth quickly when no one was looking and spat them out afterwards. Or else he had swallowed a few dozen mice a little while ago and was spewing them forth now from the depth of his belly, one by one. It was a trick, just a common, ordinary magician's trick. And his grin, just sneering grin of his, that sneering grin of his. Now he got up slowly and heavily, formed his slimy lips into a funnel, and blew up his belly and his cheeks. They burst out of his mouth like firecrackers. Mice, mice, hundreds of black mice. They jumped on the chairs, whistled, squeaked, screeched, raced about the car, ran everywhere, and then disappeared. Always that ugly, sneering grin, and he looked exactly like the old Sanitätsrat. Uncle Jacob, Frank Braun whispered. Suddenly he fell forward as something forced him down on his knees. Holding on to the chair with his left hand and supporting himself on the floor with his right, he managed to regain his balance. There was a dull thud and the shrill shriek of the train whistle. The train stopped. Something had happened. He jumped up and ran into the next car. There was great excitement among the passengers. They were opening windows to look outside or trying to force their way to the rear of the car. What has happened? He called. No one knew. He forced his way through the car, surging along with the crowd. He could not see anything in the next car either, not in the third, nor in the third. But then he saw what had happened. It was nothing unusual. The guard at one of the crossings had been asleep, and the bars had not been let down. By a silly coincidence, the horses of a farm wagon had shied and had rushed right into the train. The horses were lying near the track, horribly mutilated, and the wagon was smashed into pieces. One of the horses was dead already, and a merciful passenger had just put the second out of its misery with his revolver. Nothing had happened to the driver, however. He had been thrown clear over the train and had landed on the other side of the track. He was rubbing his legs and arms, feeling himself all over to see whether anything was broken. He had come off with hardly a scratch. Nothing had happened to the train either, except for a few scratches on the paint of one car. A window pane was smashed where the pole of the cart had gone through. Just this one window pane was smashed, and something had been behind it. The blond head of a passenger, now red with blood. The passenger was the little purser's assistant, who had taken Frank Braun's seat. He was dead. They carried the body to the baggage car in front and left it there. The delay lasted not more than 10 minutes. Then the whistle blew, but they had to wait a few minutes more before they could proceed to let another train pass, coming in the opposite direction. Frank Braun looked at it as it passed by. There, at a window, sprawling on his seat, sat the ugly man who looked like Uncle Jacob. He spat out the window, and a little black mouse hurried across the tracks. Intermission. The ferry plowed its way slowly across the Hudson, a huge turtle with great rounded shell crawling quietly and noiselessly across the water. Frank Braun sat on the upper deck and looked back at the peaks and crags of Manhattan as they glowed in the dull light of the November sun. The second officer sat beside him. "So you still insist that you are going?" Frank Braun asked him. The officer only nodded and said curtly, almost contemptuously, "I am going." Frank Braun took a newspaper out of his pocket. "Here, read this. The Bergens Fjord was brought into Kirkall with 560 German prisoners. This is their last catch." The officer shrugged his shoulders. "I am going just the same." "That isn't all," Frank Braun continued. "The Potsdam brought the Englishmen more than 3,000 prisoners. The Helig Olav 800. The Nieuw Amsterdam delivered almost 2,000 prisoners to the French at Brest. The Frederick VIII brought... "I know," the officer interrupted him. "The King Haakon brought almost 1,000 men to Dover, the United States twice as many to Falmouth. I know also how many prisoners the Italian boats delivered to the English in Gibraltar. Altogether 20,000 or more. I am going just the same." He was silent for a moment, and looked down the river toward the open sea. "Perhaps I will have better luck. They say that the Noordam got through. They say," Frank Braun exclaimed impatiently. "They say. And tomorrow you can read the gleeful reports in the World that she is in Hull or Cherbourg." The other man did not answer. Silently they crossed the mighty river on which steamers, tugs, and ferries scurried to and fro like giant water bugs. When they approached the Hoboken side, the officer became more talkative. "Here I always feel as if I were practically home, with so many Germans around and everybody speaking German." They passed by the long piers of the Bremer Lloyd and the Hapag, where the mighty boats of the Germans, the largest in the world, were housed. But no smoke came out of their smokestacks, and there was no life on board. The second officer stopped and pointed to the Vaterland, whose huge bulk towered high above the houses. "There, look at them. These are our boats. Wait till they sail again," Frank Braun smiled. But the officer shook his head. "Try it on somebody else, doctor. There will be enough Germans on board the Rindam. Go make them a speech." "I shall do that," Frank Braun nodded, biting his lips. "I certainly shall. You can depend on that. I will make them a speech." When they came to the pier of the Hudson, or the Holland line, they found the spacious hall crowded with fair-haired men, women, and children. The women and children cried, but the men were laughing and singing. Frank Braun and his companion pushed their way through the crowd to the gangplank. "How many passengers on board?" Frank Braun asked the purser of the Rindam, who stood beside the gangplank. "Don't know exactly," the Dutchman grumbled. 2,500, probably more. Capacity crowd, cabin, and steerage. "Germans?" The Dutchman laughed. "What else? Austrians and Hungarians. Not half a dozen neutrals. Are you going too?" Frank Braun said that he was not. "Do you think you will get them all across safely?" "Oh yes, everybody will get there all right. Don't worry. We guarantee that. They will all get across exactly as far as Falmouth. The English will be pleased. We bring them good fresh meat, and all for nothing." Without an instant's hesitation, Frank Braun mounted the gangplank. Clapping his hands and waving his newspaper in the air, he shouted as loud as he could, "Attention! Attention! Everybody!" People began to look at him. "Quiet!" someone commanded, and another man called, "Listen! He has a late edition. Let him read it." And they repeated, "Quiet! Listen! Read the cable." They all gathered around the gangplank, crowding as close to him as they could, both in the hall and up on deck of the steamer. Frank Braun began quickly, but at first he stammered and faltered. Louder, people yelled. I can't understand a word. A fat man shouted from the deck. Is it something about cluck? Don't sail, men, Frank Braun cried. Don't sail on this goddamn Dutch boat. Not one of you will get to Germany. Not a single one. They are shipping you right into the enemy's hands. Like so many herring, you are prisoners as soon as you get past Sandy Hook. And you are paying your good money for it, too. It's all right as long as you are on the ocean, but over there you'll be put into concentration camps. Do you know what that is? Concentration camps. A broad shouldered, heavily bearded seaman who stood right in front of Frank Braun began to laugh. We don't care. Anyway, it will be better than loafing around here with no work and nothing to eat. You, sir, you may be able to wait here, but what about me? And what about all the others? Are we to stay here to become beggars or thieves or criminals? I'd rather remain honest and become a prisoner of war in an English camp. You don't know what you're talking about, man, Frank Braun thundered. Here in this country, everybody at least has a chance. Over there, he hasn't even that. Here, everybody can try to work for himself and for the fatherland, but in a prison camp, he has to work for England. You don't know what it is like in prison camps. You don't know, and nobody here does. But I know. I know them well from the Boer War. Men, women, children herded together like flies, all diseased and infecting each other. Many get in, but few come out whole. Don't go on board this ship, men. Stay where you are. A tall man with a military mustache leaned across the rail. Kameraden? Kameraden? He cried. Kameraden! What this gentleman here is telling us may all be true, but I am an officer, and so are many others here, either in the regular force or in the reserve corps, all members of our magnificent army. Men over there, our brothers and fathers and friends, are fighting for life and death, giving their blood for their children and wives for the honor of our fatherland. Are you going to stay behind like cowards? Just this morning I saw the Consul General and talked to him about the very things that this gentleman here was telling us. I asked him what we should do, and the Consul General, the representative of our people, told me that it was the duty of every German citizen to return home by the quickest and best possible way to offer his services to the cause of the fatherland. You all know it, too. Didn't many of you get the money for the trip from the consul himself? We will get through. Or will we get through? I asked the consul, and he answered, the rest is in the hands of God, and as your conscience prompts you, and do your duty. Kameraden, the fact that we all came here shows that we are all willing to do our duty. Whatever may happen, we will have done our duty, our proud duty as Germans and as men. Frantic cheers and applause followed the ringing words of the German officer. Germany forever, people shouted. Hurrah for the Emperor. Frank Braun drummed with his fingers on the railing of the gangplank, waiting impatiently until the crowd would quiet down. Then he began again. Men, he cried, men, you are insane. But he could not make himself heard over the din of the hall. Shouts and yells, cries and sobs mingled with the shrill blasts from the steam whistle, and above the tumult rose the strains of the song that the crowd never stopped singing, that they started over and over again, one verse after another. Lieb Vaterland, magst ruhig sein. The hawsers were loosened, and with a great rattling noise the anchor chain was hoisted. Sailors pulled up the gangplank and closed the rail. Slowly, the Rindam started to move. Suddenly, Frank Braun was left alone in the great hall as all those who had stayed ashore hurried to the front of the pier where they could see the steamer pass, where they might catch a last glimpse of their loved ones. They waved their handkerchiefs, singing and shouting, Auf Wiedersehen! The ship's band played the usual farewell song, Muss I den, Zoom, Staddle, Heinz, Staddle, Heinz. My German isn't up to par, buddy. Frank Braun looked down the Hudson after the Rindam, and his lips mumbled, there she goes, there she goes, and yet he was ashamed that he was not on board too. Then he remembered an old song from the Buerland, and I'm not going to attempt this. He laughed bitterly, the old song come true again. Here they were all decked out in their bridal garb, all of them, just like the mouse hero in the song. And all of them were going to their beloved bride, whose name was Fatherland, going to Rotterdam like the he-mouse, and the only difference was that the mouse hero had been luckier because he got to the city in spite of his strange vehicle, while they, the 2,000 rats, would never get there. Their damned Dutch pot, was already a giant rat trap. He stared as someone put a hand lightly on his shoulder. It was Tews, an editor of the Deutscher Herald. Doctor, the newspaper man cackled hoarsely. This was a failure, so to speak. Frank Braun nodded silently. I could have told you that before, the man continued. I have been on the pier every time a boat sailed. I have watched 17 boats sail since August. It is always the same. It's simply no use. He waited, and when no answer was forthcoming, he continued, Anyway, you speak well, you have the material in you, and you have the name, too. You must help us for the German cause. What have I got to do with it? Frank Braun said morosely. Come, the editor appeased him. We need you, doctor. You cut a good figure, and you know how to speak. You will soon learn all the little tricks. Phrases, nice fat phrases, as the major dished them out a while ago. That is what the crowds want. Words that everybody knows, that every child can learn by heart. Any Veren's speaker in Germany knows how to do that. You will see how that packs them in. But then there is something that these phrase makers can't do, something the major not do either. A clever thought now and then, something new once in a while for the better class people, because they are just as important to us as the masses, believe me, and they have to have something better now and then to keep from vomiting. What with all the talk about the black, white, and red, and the nation's plight, about German culture, Kaiser, and Reich, about Bismarck's heirloom, and all the rest of it. Taking Frank Braun's arm, he walked up and down with him, talking incessantly. Frank Braun had to help. It was his duty. He could not desert them in such a time. Didn't he know how everything German was being dragged into the mud here every single day? Didn't he see all the abuse to which they were exposed in this country? Therefore, the Germans here would have to unite to defend themselves. The Committee for German Propaganda had been definitely formed now, and Frank Braun would have to join it. Frank Braun heard what the man said, but the voice seemed to come from far away, as if the man were not talking to him at all, but to someone else. Yes, he said lightly. The newspaper man grew more insistent. You won't go away from me like this. He smiled. Not from me. You will have to make a try, at least. If it is a failure, all right. But if it is a success, we will send you throughout the country. It will be no pleasure, I must warn you, but you simply have to do it. You have to. He interrupted himself for a moment and took hold of a button on Frank Braun's coat. Tell me, doctor, he asked, would you go over to Germany if you had a reasonable chance of getting there safely? Frank Braun thought, just what I asked the captain, but the editor did not wait for an answer. There, you see, And now look here. You can do more for Germany, 10 times more, 10,000 times more than if you were over there lying in a trench. All right, then. You will try it, won't you, Doctor? On Sunday at the German Day in Baltimore. Frank Braun nodded mechanically. Yes, yes. The man pulled out his pocket. The man pulled out his notebook. Your address, please, and your telephone number. He closed the book and put it back in his pocket. He seemed very well satisfied with himself. So, it is settled. You will hear from me, Doctor. I will give you all the details some other time. I will telephone you tomorrow. He turned to go, but came back quite quickly. I almost forgot there is a lady here waiting for you. She wants to talk to you, an old friend of yours. What is her name? Mrs. Van Ness. Tews answered. Come along now, please. He tried to pull Frank Braun away with him. I don't know her. I have never heard that name before, Frank Braun protested. But she knows you, Doctor. Don't worry. The newspaper man insisted. It was she who gave me the idea of getting you for our cause. But please come along now. I am in a hurry. I have to get back to the office. He pulled Frank Braun to the other end of the hall where a lady was waiting for them. She was of medium height, a slim figure dressed in deep mourning, with a long crape veil hiding her face. Here he is, Tews said, and he introduced Mrs. Van Ness. Then he turned quickly to go. And now you must excuse me, I really can't stay. He walked away, hurrying over to the exit with long, rapid strides. The lady pushed back her veil, and Frank Braun saw that she had reddish blonde hair and sparkling green eyes. Oh no, he thought, not black. She should never wear black. Then he recognized her. It was Lottie Levy. It is you, Lottie. He used the former C. She smiled. See? Still see? Well then, do, Lottie, he corrected himself. Do, if you prefer. When did we last see each other? In Venice, 6 years ago. I met you in St. Mark's Square, and you said Lottie Levy, the Phoenician, red hair, green eyes, and thin black lines over them, slim as Baltus, and her nails dyed with henna. Boarding school desires, yet knows every sin and is longing for new ones. Tiergarten, thoroughbred, should wear belladonna in her hair. Do you remember so well what I said? He asked. She nodded. Very well. What you said and what I said and what happened. I had you for 1 day and 1 night. You are in mourning, he interrupted quickly. She noticed that he was trying to direct the conversation into less dangerous channels, and only smiled, a slow, inscrutable smile. Why, do you think that I would let you go now? You too, he laughed, and his laugh sounded almost relieved. Just now that editor got hold of me. Do you think that anybody can take me and do with me what he pleases? She became serious. Yes, I do think that. Anybody can take you, anybody who cares and wants to. Sometimes I think that you are not even a human being, only a a stringed instrument that, strangely enough, looks alive. Anything can take you and play on you. People, things, thoughts. You, Frank Braun, you are always only a puppet in your melodrama. And do you want to pull the strings again, Lottie? He scoffed. You must remember, however, that I have at least one will of my own. What is that? The will to run away. She nodded. Oh, yes. Perhaps the best thing about you. For yourself and for others, too. It keeps you young. As you do, Lottie, he remarked. She sighed. Do you think so? I am 30 now. Anyway, I know that I have never in my life looked better than I do now. Not even when I was 15, and when you see, or rather, when I forced you to seduce me, was I as beautiful as I am now, and yet not when I had you again at 19, nor the last time in Venice. Yes, I know that I am beautiful now, and therefore our love affair is old, Lottie, he interrupted her. She looked at him quietly. Our friendship, you mean? Yes, quite old, 16 years now, but our love affair, let me count. One afternoon in Berlin, then our Easter trips a few years later makes 5 days, and again Venice 1 day and 1 night. Altogether 1 week, therefore, on the outside. She never took her glance from him, but he did not return it, and his eyes roamed through the spacious hall. Finally, she said with a little sigh, "It seems we are the last ones. Let us go." They walked silently for a few paces. Then she began again. "Aren't you wondering why I am in mourning?" "Oh, yes," he said. "Has your father died, or your mother?" "Father died 3 years ago," she replied. "He had a stroke. The Guillaume Commenzinret Levy had a beautiful funeral, quite magnificent and very Christian, after mother's heart. She moved away from Berlin afterwards, and now she is living on her estate in Thuringia with her father, the old Baron Kubeck. 3 years ago," he mused, "and you are still in mourning? Not for father. Shortly before he died, I married an American, Cotton, a business friend of father's. He was very rich. He died 6 weeks ago." I am so," he tried. It was no use. He could not bring himself to say it. "Never mind, my friend," she said, and they walked another few steps in silence. "The last time I saw you," he began again, "you told me that you were engaged to a count or something. In Venice, wasn't it?" A gleam of joy flashed across her face. "Oh, you remember. Yes, mother had set her heart on it, but father didn't want me to. I believe he would have preferred me to marry you. And you?" "I," she laughed. I too, of course. You know that very well, but you had gone the next day, and at that time I was still a little proud or stupid, whichever you prefer. Instead of going after you, I cried my heart out, as I had done before. Then the American came, and father grew insistent, just as mother had been with her handsome count. One or the other, I didn't care, so I counted it off on the buttons of father's waistcoat and became Mrs. Van Ness. When they had reached the street, she beckoned to her chauffeur. The car pulled up, and Frank Braun opened the door. "I will see you again, I hope," he said. She laughed gaily. "No," she said, "no, not this time. Get into the car." When he hesitated, she raised her voice. "Get into the car." "Lottie," he protested, and his voice was very soft. "Lottie, haven't we two crossed swords often enough? And didn't you always win? Why don't you say it? But now I know you, Frank Braun. Know you better than you know me, even better than you know yourself. And therefore you think that today you will win, Lottie. Wait. And therefore you think that today you will win, Lottie. Today, yes, she spoke very firmly. Now, in this hour. Look here, what good would it do for you to go away? I would be in your apartment tomorrow, and the next day, and again, and you would give me, and you would give in some day, and you would give in some day. You know you would. He bit his lips. "Why don't you admit it?" she insisted. "Perhaps," he swallowed. "Certainly," she corrected. "And because you realize it, that is why I am stronger than you are. Now, get in." He got into the car, and she followed him. She sat down beside him and closed the door. Then she dropped her veil. "Home," she ordered. These chapters are too long, and I'm too tired. All right, that's the end of chapter 2. Where the hell's my bookmark? Where is it, Robs? There it is. I found it, Rob. I found it. That's all, Robs. Unless anyone has something to say. Robs? Robs! Anything?